career hats. Oh, no! Battles deep into the night! Has left the stadium entirely!
You're listening to the Baumbastic Podcast with Andrew Ellis on Inside Arkansas.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Baumbastic Podcast, presented by Inside Arkansas and hosted by Andrew Ellis. And as you know, today's show is brought to you by SARACEN, the #1 sports betting partner in the state of Arkansas. We've got a very unique episode here on the Baumbastic Podcast because we've got some non-Arkansas news to react to, which I feel ties directly to the Arkansas program, situation, everything involved, and it's someone that you know very well. Tony Vitello, in case you've been living under a rock, the Tennessee head baseball coach, Tony Vitello, will be leaving Knoxville and heading to San Francisco to be the manager of the San Francisco Giants. A historic move. I believe it is the first, at least I have been reading everywhere today, that it is the first time a college coach has gone straight from college head coach to MLB manager. So definitely a big deal. And as you guys know, Tony Vitello, quite the polarizing figure who has become a very prominent person in college baseball. Of course, a former Dave Van Horn assistant at Arkansas before he took that Tennessee job. And so a guy that we've always had our eye on, a guy that, of course, Arkansas has had their battles with, and just a very big figure that when he does something, it's newsworthy and it's notable. So I felt like it's a no-brainer to talk about this. And I mentioned, I think this ties directly to Arkansas' situation maybe it's in an adjacent way. Maybe ties directly to is a little bit of a stretch, but I think this has implications to Arkansas. And apparently that is a polarizing opinion, but it's just very interesting. And so I want to talk about all of this. I want to talk about what this means for college baseball, what this means for Tennessee, what this means for Arkansas for the immediate future, and also what this could possibly mean for what Arkansas does after Dave Van Horn decides to find something else, decides to retire and decides to end his coaching career, which, by the way, let's get this out of the way now. Dave Van Horn gets to do that whenever the hell Dave Van Horn wants. Make no mistake about that. Absolutely. When he does that, which, maybe that'll be 1 year, maybe that'll be 3 years, maybe that'll be 10 years from now. We don't know. That's another facet of this conversation that I want to get to and talk about today. But again, I'm just fascinated by this situation. I'm very intrigued. I'm perplexed, and I'm in the minority. I have absolutely no idea, like 0.0% of an iota of an idea how this is going to play out. And I don't want to confuse you guys on this show and make you think that I am sitting here telling you, all right, hey, Tony V's going to San Francisco. This is how this is going to play out. Beep, beep, beep. It's going to go out just like this. And I also don't want you to think that I am telling you how to feel. I feel how I feel. You feel how you feel. A lot of the fans, Tony Vitello is a very polarizing figure. Everyone kind of has their perspective and their opinion on him. And nobody, I feel like it kind of is all over the place. And so that's part of why I think this is such a fascinating conversation. And so I'm going to try my best to break it all down and sort of assess what this means and get into weeds of this and how this could potentially affect Arkansas. Before we do that, of course, I want to talk to you about one of our good partners here at Inside Arkansas. If I can finally find the clip here. OZK Insurance. Are you tired of juggling insurance companies to find the right coverage? At OZK Insurance and Rogers, they make insurance simple again. As a 100% independent agency, they shop the entire marketplace to deliver the best combination of cost and coverage, saving you both time and money, whether it's home, auto, boat, motorcycle, life or commercial insurance. Their friendly team has access to a wide range of flexible options designed just for you. They serve Northwest and Central Arkansas, including Bentonville, Centerton, Fayetteville, Little Rock, Hot Springs, Springdale, and beyond. Let OZK be the trusted advisor you never knew you needed. Don't take my word for it. Trust the over 600 5-star Google reviews they have received. Start today with a free online quote at ozkinsurance.com or call 479-715-4200. OZK, it's insurance made simple. We appreciate them. So, okay, I'm going to do something a little bit weird here on this show, and I apologize if you think this is stupid or you just don't get what I'm doing here. I'm going to pull up a tweet that I put out, and I'm going to basically dissect the replies to this tweet because I just think it's fascinating. Again, so there's a thing that happens. I've been working in sports media full time since 2021. That's whenever I took a job to work for Trey Biddy at hogsports.com. It's the first time I started getting paid to do this. And I've learned a lot since then. And I've kind of, cut my teeth in this industry, first with a legitimate kind of journalism reporting background, and then was doing just random writing work, and then started really covering the teams fully that fall. And I've learned a lot. One thing that I have learned about myself, though, is that I do have a tendency to rub people the wrong way and piss people off. And I've kind of always known that about myself. And there's even times where I'm kind of intentional. I'm kind of the kids would call it a rage baiter. Like I kind of can know when I'm pressing buttons, and sometimes I get into these discussions with other fans or other media members, and I kind of know I'm a little smug about how it is, and I'm sure I've rubbed some of you the wrong way over the years. One thing I appreciate about this show is that usually I'm talking baseball, something that I'm pretty well versed in. I know what I'm talking about, and the people that listen to this show are diehard baseball fans, so they understand the context, they understand what I'm saying, they understand kind of who I am, my personality, and so I usually don't get a ton of pushback from you guys, which I always appreciate. This is kind of my safe space, but when we're doing shows on Inside Arkansas Live, or I'm tweeting, or just anything else, I get a lot of pushback from people who maybe, I don't know if they just don't know me, or maybe they just misinterpret some things that I say, but there's a lot of times where I will say or do something and get a very overwhelming negative reaction. And it kind of makes me take a step back and be like, oh, wow. Like maybe, I didn't realize what I was saying was that polarizing, but holy cow, like let me reassess the situation. That happened to me on Saturday, right before Arkansas's game. Arkansas's playing at whatever it was, like 2:30, or it ended up being 4:30, the Arkansas A&M game. In that window, this Tony Vitello news started to break that he was closing in on a deal to be the San Francisco Giants manager, and so we all kind of reacted in real time, and then it got postponed a little bit. The official announcement came out today, but I'm going to show you. This is the tweet that I put out right around that time, and see, I think the time, 1:48 p.m., so a couple hours before the game. I said the conversation of who Arkansas's next baseball coach will be after Dave Van Horn just changed drastically. That is my exact quote, and that's quoting Ken Rosenthal, who was talking about the Giants manager search, talking about Tony Vitello. I got to be honest, like even as I sit here now, it's just not that polarizing of a tweet. What I have gathered now is that a lot of people read that tweet of me saying, hey, this changes the conversation drastically. They read that and took that to mean that Tony Vitello is no longer in the mix to be Arkansas's next head coach, which was not what I was saying in any way, shape, or form. And so a lot of people reached out to say that, oh, no, this doesn't change the conversation. He still very much could be the next head coach, which obviously I agree with. But I thought it was very interesting how many people push back against it that way. But the reason I say it's not polarizing, because even if you believe Tony Vitello is going to be the next head coach at Arkansas, and you believe he's very interested, you would have to at least concede that him coming from Tennessee is very different than him coming from San Francisco and coming from an MLB organization. Therefore, you acknowledge it's a different conversation, right? And I think even the people because by the way, there's another group of people that I've received a lot of pushback from, and they were saying this doesn't change the conversation because Tony Vitello was never a candidate to be the head coach at Arkansas. Like that was never a thing at all. And so him going to the MLB doesn't matter because he was not, no matter what, he was not going to be the head coach, which, I'm not saying, not even really disagreeing. I just don't know how someone could come to that conclusion based on all the information we have available to us. I'm not saying for sure this guy's being poised to be the next head coach, but I think we all should be able to agree that like it's at least something we can have a conversation about. It's at least something that is to be considered. It's at least something that him and Dave Van Horn, two very good friends who communicate very regularly, I'm sure they've talked about. And I know the kind of esteem that Tony Vitello has always held the Arkansas job in. And I know some of the things he tells people in the state of Arkansas and kind of plants some of these seeds. Whether he was actually going to be the head coach or not, there were enough seeds planted to where I just felt like that was it's at least a storyline. Whether it's going to come to fruition or not, it's at least a conversation that, frankly, we've been having for years. And so, again, I thought we're having this conversation all the time. We have it every year. Now that the main culprit in this conversation is changing jobs, and he's not only changing jobs, he's going to a completely different level of baseball that no one ever has done before. Therefore, there is no precedent for a move like this. I just think that's interesting. And I thought Tony Vitello moving to San Francisco was a notable thing that would kind of change the conversation. And I just want to read some of these responses. And again, I know this is kind of a lame segment, reading my own Twitter replies, but it's like, I just want to put into perspective how polarizing this whole Tony Vitello thing is. So again, my tweet reads, the conversation of who Arkansas's next baseball coach will be after Dave Van Horn just changed drastically. And the replies, here are some of them. One says, no, Tony will wash out in the MLB and return to college level as Razorback head coach. It's the only viable path, which that cracks me up because it insinuates that there's only one way this thing could play out, which if you believe that, whether you think that one way is him being the head coach at Arkansas or him being a 7-time World Series manager for the Giants, there is much more than just one way this thing could play out. So I love the notion that everyone seems to believe that like this is all set in stone already and they already know how it's going to play out. And so I, responded, hey, yeah, I actually think he's very much still going to be a candidate. It's just a different conversation. Then another reply says, no, it hasn't. When he's 45 and 117, it'll start right back up. Some might say he took this job just to hang out until Dave is ready to hang it up, which, again, that second line I think is telling of the mindset of a lot of Razorback fans who did view this move as a positive development in the hunt to get Tony Vitello. Whether that's true or not, I just think that line of thinking is very interesting. And I'm actually not that far away from like agreeing with that line of thinking, but I do think it's telling how many Razorback fans believe that to be true. And so that's what this one guy says, hey, he took this job just to hang out until DVH is ready to hang up, which is an optimistic way to view this from the Arkansas stance. And then another reply says, not really. This is a good thing. He'll be tired of the MLB when it's time. It's stunning how many people were like, this conversation has not changed at all. He's still coming to Arkansas. And in fact, they view this as like confirmation that he's coming to Arkansas, which is just interesting. Another response, not necessarily. Coaches often go to the big leagues to get their taste of it and come back after they do it, which is a true statement. I mean, we've seen college coaches at the football and basketball go get a taste of pro action and then come right back. A ton of them have done that. A couple nice responses asking for Baumbastic episodes. One interesting response here that I actually do want to read. It says, let me ask this though. How would it work having to wait until September to hire him if DVH retired in June a few years down the road? I thought about this too. Just wonder how that weight affects things. That is the most interesting response I got by far, because it's actually something that like we can have a conversation about. Every other response I got was like, I don't know why you're talking about this. This is not news at all, which is just crazy to me. But that is interesting because like, let's say again, there's a lot of people who view Tony Vitello as the next Arkansas head coach, and they think him going to coach the Giants is proof of that like, oh yeah, he's going to just kind of bide his time and then come back to Arkansas. Well, let's say 2 seasons happen, the 2026 season that's about to happen, and then the 2027 season. Let's assume that an Arkansas national title also happened in that time span. And then after that 2027 season, it's June, and Dave says, all right, I'm done. This was my victory lap. Or hey, maybe we even knew going into the 2027 season, all right, this is it. Would Tony Vitello just leave his team in the middle of June? Very possible. I mean, that's what some people do. I mean, that's what Bobby Petrino did when he was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. When the Arkansas job came available, he just simply left him a note on the locker and was out of there. Maybe that's what he does. Would Arkansas, what if the Giants are in the playoff hunt? What if they're kind of still in the mix and he's got to stick around? Would Arkansas wait? Would Dave maybe change his announcement? I don't know. Again, are these two things even related at all? Is Tony even going to be in consideration? I don't know, because another part of this equation is what's going to happen in the next 2 years. Like, what if Tony Vitello goes to San Francisco and they are awesome? They win over 100 games, and he's like this new era model of what baseball managers should look like, and he presses all the right buttons, and he loves it, and he decides he wants to stay there long term. Obviously, we would then agree. Then the conversation is very different in terms of who Arkansas's next head coach is going to be. But there's a lot of things that people are considering. Shout out, but the Twitter account was named @HogPerson. Credit to him for being the first one to like ask an interesting question this whole thing. Then a few more responses that are just saying, yeah, no, this hasn't changed at all. Now here we reached a section where I got a response that says, it was always going to be Hobbs, referencing Matt Hobbs, Arkansas's pitching coach, saying he is the guy who is going to be the next head coach, which, by the way, not an unpopular or like crazy out of this world opinion. I think there's a lot of people who view Matt Hobbs in that kind of regard and view him as a guy that very well could wind up being the next head coach at Arkansas. I do just love the notion that he's like, hey, it was always going to be Hobbs. Like, it's obviously that's the guy. There's no other path forward other than that. I got a Tennessee fan here who says, "Man, y'all are way too obsessed with Tony V. He's a Vol and always will be." I'm actually going to retweet that right now, just for my own funsies. Then I have one tweet that says, "My preference has not changed. Wes Johnson, come on down." I like that. That's actually pretty funny. And then I see a couple that say, "Hey, yeah, this actually makes the Tony V thing more likely. I don't think his shtick is going to work in the MLB. All that's fine." Then a couple guys that say, "Yeah, I'm still on the Matt Hobbs bandwagon." One guy that says it should be Chris Curry, which, respectable. I can get behind that. Few other that say, "Yeah, no, this actually makes it easier." But the consensus is, and then I have one that says, "No, it didn't. It's always been Hobbs." 4 or 5 different people were like, it was always going to be Matt Hobbs no matter what. And I just think that's a funny thing to say about a job opening that does not currently exist. Like, Dave Van Horn is the head coach at Arkansas and has given no inclination that he's like about to retire, or that like this is going to be his last year, or that he's like looking for a replacement. So I find it really hilarious as a person who has a podcast dedicated my entire life to covering this baseball program. I am coming to you right now and saying, I have no idea who Arkansas's next head coach is going to be, nor do I think anyone else has any idea. I think it's very funny how many people are very firmly like, no, it's obviously going to be Tony Vitello and it's already decided. And they think, or no, it's always going to be Matt Hobbs and it's already been decided. And they think nothing could happen in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. They think nothing could happen to change that fate. I just think that's interesting. And maybe you guys don't. And maybe you guys think I'm stupid for doing this whole Tony Vitello episode on his move, and you think this is just a pointless conversation. I really might be in the minority. Like, I might be the only person who thinks this is like a notable thing that is a conversation worth having. I've just been kind of taken back by some of the responses, and not even in a bad way. Like, I'm just, sometimes I feel a certain way, and then, it's like, hey, I think this team is going to win. And then I hear someone say, well, actually, I think this team is going to win. And here's why, X, Y, Z, Z. And then they kind of win me over. Like, I'm not, one of those people who can't change my mind. Hell, I change my mind all the time. By the time Dave Van Horn actually does retire and it's time to name a successor, I will have changed my mind like 9 times between now and then on who I think the next guy is going to be, who I think it should be, and all that. And frankly, I think you guys should too. Like, I don't think you should be going into this situation, and I say going into this situation where it's really just on the Arkansas side, we're just business as usual. I don't think you should be dead set on like, it has to be Matt Hobbs as the next guy, or it has to be Nate Thompson as the next guy, or it has to be Tony Vitello, or it has to be Wes Johnson. Like, Arkansas is going to have their pick, and we'll see how that plays out. And I think we all agree this Tony Vitello shakeup definitely affects Arkansas, whether that be directly or indirectly. It definitely is a huge chess piece that we're going to have to account for. I've been very fascinated by the response from Razorback fans. In terms of, by the way, because the part we're leaving out of this whole thing is, what is Tony V's tenure in San Francisco going to look like? Like I said, there is no precedent for this. There is no other college baseball coach who went right to being an MLB manager and, like, one had success, one didn't. Like, there are 0 people who have done this, so we don't really know what that's going to look like. And I think it also is worth mentioning that NFL head coach, college head coach, those are 2 very different jobs. MLB manager, college baseball head coach, very different jobs. I wonder how, like, a lot of the things that make Tony very good, I think he's clearly a great evaluator of talent. That's one thing he's always been able to do, is identify tools and see what works and what doesn't work. I think that skill set will certainly serve him well in the MLB, but, like, is he going to have much player personnel instruction? Like, does he get to make some of those decisions? How influenced will the front office be by his way of thinking? Like, that's interesting to me. I also think the personality stuff, we always say the antics of the way that the Tennessee program had operated for the last 7-8 years, played with an edge, played with a certain swagger, if you will, or a disrespect for the game, as some view it, whatever you want to view it. There was certainly just a certain style of play that he and his team's kind of a personality they took on. Will that translate to the big leagues? I don't know. I think that's interesting to me. And again, I'm not sitting here telling you I know the answer. It's funny how many people try and tell you guys they have the answer of like, oh, Tony's antics, they're not going to work in the MLB. He'll go 40 and 100 and whatever. It's like, it's just not going to work. And maybe it doesn't. That's very possible. In fact, most college coaches who go to the professional ranks, whether that be basketball or football, most of them don't have a ton of success historically. There's some examples here and there, but like even Nick Saban didn't have a ton of success going up and coaching the Dolphins. So that is possible. I just think it's funny how many people like seem to just know for a fact that that's not going to work. Another factor in this that I think is interesting is the San Francisco Giants are historically one of the better run organizations that have a lot of resources, have a freaking amazing field out there. And by the way, I have a buddy, one of my lifelong best friend, John Toops, great guy. He lives in San Francisco. He's lived there for a couple of years now. Him and his soon-to-be fiance. They've been living out there, and he's kind of adopted the Giants. He's never been a huge MLB fan, but now that he lives in a city with an MLB team, he's become a fan a little bit. He goes to the games. He has a good time, got some buddies who like the Giants. So it's kind of become a thing that he's adopting. And he was telling me the other day about how Drew Gilbert, who, if you remember, Drew Gilbert played for Tony Vitello at Tennessee, then was drafted by the Astros, traded to the Mets, and I think traded to the Giants, now is up in the big leagues with the Giants and is become a huge piece in that locker room of like a huge up-and-coming star. I mean, he's playing in the outfield for them, playing every day, and his personality and his swagger has really captivated the San Francisco fan base. Like, my buddy John loves Drew Gilbert. He's like, oh, yeah, love the juice that guy brings. Like, it's awesome. And so that's another thing that I just keep thinking about in this whole conversation where I'm like, we're all looking at this Tony Vitello thing, and I think most people reasonably assume this isn't going to be the last job he ever has, and that it's, probably not going to result in him winning a ton of World Series. And I don't necessarily think that's going to happen either. But part of the equation of this whole thing is everyone is assuming that Tony is not going to have a ton of success in San Francisco, and maybe he won't. I just don't know if that's an assumption I'm willing to make just yet. I also don't want to make the assumption of assuming that, the mistake of assuming that Tony Vitello is doing this with the Arkansas job in mind. I'm sure it is some level on his radar. It's something he's thought about, but I just don't know if I can quite buy the narrative that he is doing this to make it easier to go to Arkansas. Will it make it easier for him to go to Arkansas? Yes. I just don't know if I can buy that is why he is doing this. And by the way, the question of his motivation of why is he doing this is also interesting, because I just, right before I started this episode, I saw a report from Bob Nightingale, one of the top MLB reporters, who said that Tony Vitello is actually taking a pay cut to do this, which frankly is just hilarious to me. Like, especially, it's one thing if your coach leaves, anytime your coach leaves and goes somewhere else. It doesn't happen in Arkansas a ton, honestly. There's always factors. If they're going to a program that is better, you're kind of like, oh man, does that mean we're not as good of a program? But if they're going somewhere, if they go to a completely different level, like the MLB, and they make a ton of money, it's pretty easy to kind of buy into that of like, oh, okay, well, of course they did that. They're making a ton of money. They're going to the MLB. That's fine. I wonder how Tennessee fans are going to feel about the fact that that he took a pay cut to leave your program and wanted to go do something else. I know he's been kind of eyeballing MLB. Not that I knew he was going to take a job, but he's been on the MLB draft desk. He's done some stuff for MLB Network. He's obviously got a ton of players in there. I didn't realize how interested he was, but I think it's, is this really as simple as like Tony just wants a new challenge and doesn't care about the money, doesn't care about the resources, doesn't care about the branding or any of that stuff? I really don't know. And I look forward in the next few weeks, months, however long, to hearing, because I'm sure Tony's going to do a press conference. I'm sure he's going to be asked a ton about sort of his motivation and what led to him making this decision. I'm very intrigued by this, man. I'm very fascinated by this. I don't anticipate a ton of people are going to be, because by the way, this is at the end of the day an Arkansas baseball podcast. I don't anticipate anybody's going to be asking him about the Arkansas job anytime soon, especially these MLB reporters who don't even really know the context of that whole thing. But I do think it's fascinating. And in terms of Tennessee and their program, by the way, I've also seen a lot of people saying another dangerous assumption I've seen a lot of Hawk fans making is saying, well, Tennessee's back to the gutter. Like, Tennessee baseball was nothing before Tony Vitello, and they'll go back to being nothing. I would love nothing more for that to be the truth. And it is true in part that Tennessee baseball was nothing. In fact, you can actually look this up. Tennessee baseball did not exist prior to 2017. That is actually a fact. You can look that up. 2017, that's the year they hired Tony Vitello. The baseball program did not exist. So while I do concede Tennessee baseball was nothing before Tony Vitello, they certainly were something with Tony Vitello. And I don't know if I quite buy yet that that's something that they are and that he has built and that he has turned them into is just going to go away immediately. Particularly because if you look at the roster they have now, the Tennessee team that teams are about to play in 2026, it's a pretty damn good one. In fact, you could look at it and make a real, not even that hard argument to make that it is the number one roster in college baseball. You could also look at their recruiting class for 2026 and 2027. I think in 2027, I think they have 4 of the top 11 players already committed, which is notable. They've got a ton of top 100 guys in next year's class. And so again, of course, some of these guys, I'm sure there are going to be some decommits. I'm sure there's going to be some guys maybe who had planned to go to Tennessee later that maybe aren't going to go to Tennessee. I'm sure there's some guys on the current roster who aren't going to be thrilled about it, although Kendall Rogers did report today that Tennessee players, while they can enter the transfer portal, would not be eligible to play baseball in 2026 at the D1 level. So as much as I would love to look at their roster and say, oh, man, we could get Henry Ford. This is going to be awesome. Nobody that transfers from Tennessee is going to be playing baseball in 2026 at the D1 level. So not really a big conversation there. But anyways, I do think that things are going to change for the Tennessee program, although it does seem all signs are pointing to them promoting Josh Elander, who's been there with Tony Vitello for a long time as the hitting coach and recruiting coordinator, has his hand very heavily involved in everything going on with that Tennessee program. And so I think that'll help them sort of soften the blow, which is kind of, by the way, what A&M tried to do with Michael Early, tried to kind of keep the band together so you could keep the roster intact. Didn't really work out for A&M. We'll see if it works out for Tennessee. I think they have a much more talented roster. And I also think Josh Elander is a stud. Like, I think Elander was probably, if Tony had stayed and they had just run it back for a couple more years, Elander would have likely ended up getting an SEC head coaching job somewhere, one way or another. Now he just has the Tennessee job, or is likely. I'm assuming there. That's me making an assumption there. I'm assuming Elander is going to be the head coach, just because I don't really imagine there's a ton of college coaches who are looking to jump ship on their programs to go to another college program in November, December. That's not really a popular coaches transfer portal window. So the timing of this just kind of sucks for Tennessee in that regard. But I do think they're going to be able to keep the roster together for this year, of course. We'll see what they do for the future recruiting classes. But I would push back against the notion that Tennessee is about to just fade into oblivion. Again, I hope they do. And I think it's possible that they will. I just don't think it's going to be an overnight, like the 2026 Tennessee Volunteers are just going to suck. Like, I actually think it's maybe even more likely that they are in Omaha competing for a national title than it is that they're like not good. But we'll see, man. Again, the point of this episode was not to convince you guys that I know what's about to happen here, or to convince you guys that you should feel a certain way. I am just kind of very baffled and intrigued by this whole conversation, and have enjoyed having it the last few days. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the responses are to this video. I know this has been a little bit of word salad, me just rambling a little bit, and me reading replies to my tweets and stuff. But I do look forward to hearing what you guys have to say, because I'd imagine most of you fall into one of those two categories I talked about earlier. You either believe that Tony V is still a very serious candidate for Arkansas, and that this move to San Francisco only draws the runway up for that even clearer, or you're in the belief that, like, Tony V, you don't like the antics, you don't want him to be the head coach of Arkansas, you don't think he was ever going to be considered. I would imagine everyone listening, I'm looking at you, you probably fall in one of those categories. And again, I'm not even here to tell you you're wrong. I just, doing what I do on this podcast, kind of setting the narrative for the common fan. I think this is interesting. I think this whole discourse is interesting. And so I'm sure we're not done talking about this. In fact, I know for a fact we're not done talking about this. We'll continue to monitor the situation, but definitely wanted to put out a video kind of getting some of my initial thoughts and opinions of this Tony Vitello situation out there. And since I did kind of dance around it a little bit, I'll just tell you from my point of view, I have always viewed Tony Vitello. He's a guy that I've always looked at and respected, one, because I knew how good he was at what he did. I knew how good he was at Arkansas. I know how big of a deal he was in kind of transforming the level of recruit that Arkansas plays around with. I mean, because, David Horn's been at Arkansas a long time, and I'm certainly absolutely not trying to like discredit Dave by any means here. But it's like, it took a while for Dave to kind of get the program to that point where not only were they winning consistently, they were recruiting at a high level, and now you're recruiting these guys that you're going to have to fend off for the MLB, and you're getting MLB draft prospects to turn down millions of dollars to come to your program. that's something that's only been happening for about a decade at Arkansas, which is coincidentally around the same time that Tony Vitello was the recruiting coordinator at Arkansas and the hitting coach, and was starting to kind of introduce some of these things that made Arkansas great back then and made Tennessee great throughout his tenure. And so I have always acknowledged that and taken that, like when you write the story of Arkansas baseball in this entire Dave Van Horn era, Tony Vitello is a very interesting chapter that I think we need to remember. And so that I say all that doesn't mean that I was always of the belief that he was going to be Arkansas's head coach. But in my personal view of it, I always that was my dream. That was always kind of the way I wanted this thing to play out, was Dave Van Horn to win a national title at Arkansas and then maybe do a little retirement tour victory lap for a season. And then Tony Vitello to come on over to Arkansas. And it would have really warmed my heart for that to be from Tennessee to Arkansas, because it would have been such an FU to Tennessee, who, by the way, worth noting, since we're telling this story, Arkansas retired Tony Vitello. I mean, they whipped him twice in that Super Regional. The final game that Tony Vitello coached at Tennessee was it wasn't a run rule, because I don't think they don't do run rules in the NCAA tournament, and I don't even know if it was a 10-point win, but it was a very thorough, very dominant Arkansas punching their ticket to the College World Series and dogpiling and steel leaves jumping in the lake. Like, that is Tony Vitello's last chapter of his Tennessee career, which truly, like, as I'm saying that, my pants are substantially tighter right now as I am saying that. It just fires me up, man. It really does. But I always had this kind of pipe dream that, like, Tony Vitello would want to come to Arkansas. And I got to be honest, man, like, what I'm not about to do is do the thing where I say, hey, here's what I'm hearing. Here's what my sources say. Anytime you hear someone, if you're listening to a podcast and someone says that, hey, this is what I'm hearing, here's what my sources are saying. There's exceptions, but like 98% of the time, whatever they are about to say after that is complete and utter BS. Like, just not, like, unequivocally, just not a real thing at all. That's not to say that they are outright lying, but a lot of times when you do the, hey, here's what my buddy who's on staff, or here's what my buddy who has a buddy who talked to the guy who's the cousin of the strength and conditioning coach, here's what he said. A lot of times you can very well hear that. That doesn't make it true. So take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I'm doing that ahead of myself saying this. And I don't have like sources inside the Tony Vitello camp by any means, but everyone that I talk to around the program at Arkansas, and even some people who do know Tony Vitello, a lot of them have not said for sure, like, oh yeah, it's definitely like in the works, it's a done deal, Tony's going to be the next head coach. But there has always been that sense and that belief that it's an interesting conversation and that it's something that both parties would most likely want to explore. And again, I really do think we're like a decent amount away from this conversation. I mentioned the two groups that were mad at me earlier. There was another third group of a guy that was like, man, I actually think it's disrespectful that you're talking about the Arkansas head coach opening when Dave Van Horn is like not retiring and not even close to retiring. And I'm more inclined to believe with that guy. And I hope that this whole podcast did not come across as like me trying to like shoo Dave Van Horn out. Like, Dave Van Horn's like my idol, dude. I definitely love Dave Van Horn. I'm not trying to indicate that he's anywhere close to being done. I actually think DVH has a ton of, time left in the tank. I think he could coach for as long as he wanted to, but I also think Dave Van Horn's going to win a national title one of these days. And I think once he wins that national title, that window or that time is going to maybe speed up a little bit. I think once he wins that title, I especially think now that he's got 3 triplets for granddaughter, he's got 3 grandchildren now. I think that certainly changes the equation a little bit. But again, I'm not trying to do this of like hey, this is all going to happen imminently. That's another part of why I think the Tony V thing is interesting. Because if Tony V is operating under the assumption that the Arkansas job is not going to open for the next 2 or 3 years, then it does kind of make sense for him to go do something else, which would take, roughly 2 to 3 years for him to figure out if it's really what he wants to do. And that's right around the time that Arkansas would hopefully be winning a national title, and hopefully that's when Dave would start maybe thinking about some of this stuff. But I'm fascinated by this whole thing, and so I look forward to hearing what you guys say, because, like I said earlier, you guys are the ones that get me. You are the ones who don't, take everything I say and take it out of context and think I'm saying something else. Like, I hope I did a good job of kind of laying out my stance, and really my stance is that everyone on Twitter is lying to you. Like, everyone on Twitter who says this is a done deal and they know how this is going to play out, they are just outright not telling the truth. Like this is a very fluid situation that is going to play out over the course of several years. And I think it's a huge deal for Arkansas. I think it's a huge deal for college baseball. It's even kind of a huge deal for the sport of baseball in general, because I think Tony Vitello is that kind of polarizing figure. And he's 47 years old, which is not like the youngest person in the world, but like there's plenty of time for him to write a very unique story, whether that be with the Giants, whether that ends up at Arkansas, whether that comes back to college baseball in some other form or fashion. I don't know, but I think we're all going to kind of have our eyes on this Tony Vitello situation, and it's going to be something we continue to keep in the back of our mind. And next week's show, I will get back to actually talking Arkansas baseball and talking about the team that you guys love and the team that you guys care. And make no mistake, man, the Razorbacks are my priority. Like, I would not be talking about this if I did not think it was going to eventually directly tie into Arkansas. And man, I can't wait, man. I really wish there weren't so many months between right now and February, but hopefully they'll fly by and we'll have a good time over the holidays. But looking forward to talking about some Arkansas baseball and looking forward to seeing some Arkansas baseball, and can't wait to see how this whole thing plays out. So make sure to subscribe to this channel. Like I said, we'll get back to talking Arkansas baseball next week, but we had to address the elephant in the room and address the biggest news of the day, man, which is very interesting. And we'll see how this Tony V situation plays out. So it's been another brilliant edition of the Baumbastic Podcast. I will see you guys later. Woo damn pig, as always. Eat your Wheaties.